Tomato pruning videos are way too long, so let's cover everything you need to know about pruning your tomatoes from spring to fall in as short as time possible. If you're growing determinate tomatoes, this video ain't for you. This is for the people growing indeterminate tomatoes, the vining type. So know which kind you're growing before you use this pruning, because if you do this on determinates, you're not going to have a good time. Now, the most popular method for pruning indeterminate tomatoes is going to be single stemming them. That just means you're going to grow one central leader all the way up the vine, and all your fruits are going to come off the vine itself. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. You can see where the tomato comes out of the ground. We have one vine that goes all the way up, and the fruit clusters hang off the sides. So now that we know what we're looking for, let me show you how to set this up, because this pruning really starts at the beginning of the season, right when you get those plants in the ground. I got a couple little guys behind me here that I planted pretty late, so this is going to be good to look at these guys. I haven't done any pruning on them, so we're going to clean them up so you can kind of get the feel what you want to do right after you plant and throughout early summer. All these leaves, like the ones here that are close to the ground, if not touching, these all got to go. If you have rain come down, splash the dirt on these leaves, it's not good. You can spread disease. So we want to tackle that problem early. So dive into your tomato. We want to find where that tomato comes out of the ground. We only want this central leader coming out of the ground. So this guy here, which just so happens to be a sucker that formed at the base of this plant, we're going to start out by getting that guy out. Now when it's really early in the season and you don't have many of these scaffold branches coming off your central leader, your tomato, you don't have to chop the whole thing off. In a situation like this, if I just put this plant in the ground and this leaf was kind of higher up, but it's still close, what you can do is you can just nip a little of it off. That allows these leaves to still photosynthesize and help this plant grow. Kind of the same thing over here. This one's getting a little too low, so I can just chop it. And what you can see here is we have nothing touching the ground here. No chance of water and mud splashing up on the plant to make it unhealthy. And we got rid of wasted energy because we're after tomatoes, not tomato plants. This starts the pattern we're going to follow all season. Now without these lower branches, we don't have to worry about that splash. Now we have to focus on the plant itself. So after planting it in the late spring, this is going to be your late spring throughout summer what you want to do here. So we want to make sure we keep this central leader here. You follow it up. This is the growth point up here. This is the guy that's going to keep growing straight up. So as your plant grows, you have a new main focus. It's going to be the suckers. You don't want suckers growing. You can occasionally walk out to your garden, check out your plants. You follow your main stem up. And here we have a side branch. And usually when you have a side branch meet the main stem, you get these side shoots coming. You don't want those. These you can just bend and they crack pretty easy and you can pull them off. Heading up even more, we have another side branch coming out with another sucker. Now, once they get bigger like this, it is better to just come in and just snip them away with a pair of pruners. But you really want to follow this up. You want to get these guys when they're tiny, when they just start growing. If these things are getting big, it means this plant has wasted energy to force these things out. Now these ones are real easy to brush off. Follow it up. Got another one growing here. Got another bigger one growing in that crotch area there. Snip that off. But now check this out. If you leave these suckers for too long, they can start to fool you. You start to guess, which one is my leader? I follow this up. It splits off into two evenly sized leaders here. But if you look in here, here's my side branch, and here is the sucker between the main stem and this side branch. So this big guy right here has got to go. So here's another important thing when you get your tomatoes in the ground. get your supports in at the same time. I just did a video on how I support my tomatoes using scraps of 3/4 EMT conduit. So I'm going to link to that video so you can watch it, because I think this is probably the best method to support tomatoes. I use these smaller scraps that would otherwise be making their way into a dumpster, but you can spend the $10 to get the conduit to support your plants, and it'll last you forever. As you'll see later on, height is no limit when it comes to this, because you can always extend them higher. But now that we got this tomato set up early season, we want to make sure it has good support. So we have the single stem now with no suckers at all on it. We want to make sure that this plant has decent support throughout its growth. So all I do here is take a cheap tie wrap. You can get these in bulk from the farm store, about $500 to $1,000 for maybe $5 or $6. And I just tie it to the conduit. I have good support here. Doesn't matter how windy it gets, this plant is not going to get knocked over. As your plant grows, you keep putting more tie wraps up, keeping the bottom of the plant clear so the leaves are nowhere near the ground, and taking all the suckers off as they form is going to carry you throughout the season. But let's move on to late spring, early summer, when you start getting fruit set, to look at the next step. So what about when you start getting fruit set, like down here? So there is my fruit cluster coming off the central leader. Any leaves below this first fruit cluster here are completely unnecessary. So once your fruits start forming, you're going to want to look and see what's going on below. And if you look in here, I got one branch below that. So that branch, gone. Now there are rare circumstances where I'd come through and cut off my first clusters of tomatoes because they were ugly or I just didn't like them. So in a situation like this, I have a lot of branches below my first fruit here, and my plant isn't all that big. So I still do want to keep some of these leaves. I'll still come through here, maybe up to a foot off the ground or so, just start chopping it up. And this is going to be somewhat typical when you first start getting fruits on your tomato plant. You're going to notice that the first 12 inches or so of your plant is probably going to be bare. Sticking with the topic of the fruits, if you go in here, you'll notice that you're going to have some buds that did not get pollinated. We're going to take those off. Those are unnecessary. And then you're going to get some tomatoes that are forming that are just downright ugly. So this plant's put a lot of energy into this super ugly tomato right here. So let's just get that tomato off the vine. We got to find a happy medium between big, healthy tomatoes and numbers of tomatoes. So let's take a look at these Black Beauty tomatoes I got right here. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. We got a nice cluster of tomatoes forming up here. They're decent size. And then we got this one oddball in here. Now, instead of the plant putting any more energy into this gross looking tomato, I'm just going to get that tomato out of there. And now the plant is going to focus on these. So this is actually a pretty decent cluster I got going on here. These tomatoes are not going to get as big as they could possibly get. So I'm going to have around 4 or so just medium-sized tomatoes in here instead of a couple really big ones. And that's kind of what I go for when I'm growing tomatoes. I'd rather have a little bit more medium size than a couple bigger ones. But that choice is really up to you. If you want these to grow bigger, you'd want to cut more of these off and maybe keep it to 2 or 3 per cluster. But as I said, it's up to you to decide what you're looking for. So we're off to a good start here. We're pulling off all the suckers as the plants continue to grow. We're tying our plants up to support them. We're looking at our fruit clusters to decide if we want bigger tomatoes or more medium-sized tomatoes, cutting off some of the ugly ones. And we're cutting off the leaves below fruit clusters. But what happens once you start harvesting? You're going to have all these empty fruit clusters. So we got this cherry tomato right here, cherry bomb, single stemmed all the way up. I've harvested some of the lower tomatoes. We are naked all the way up to this guy right here. You see right there? That is the last tomato in this cluster. These tomatoes are good and don't make it inside the house. When the fruit clusters are empty, they're of no use, they can go. My single stem is now naked, going all the way up. Let's take her up to the next fruit cluster here and grab another one of these guys to eat it. I am not worried about this tomato not having enough foliage for energy because right now these guys are tickling 10 feet tall, single stemmed. So I'm going to go in here and everything below this fruit cluster right here is going to go. So check that out. Empty stem, ground all the way up to that first fruit cluster. Still plenty of foliage left here to photosynthesize and grow a lot more tomatoes. Let's look at this guy. Got one tomato left on the cluster. I'm going to take that tomato off. We're going to remove that cluster there. And then look at this. You really got to watch. We got this little guy trying to come in the bottom here. So we're going to go ahead, pop that guy off. Completely unnecessary. And I got another empty cluster right there. Let's get rid of that. More suckers forming. It's early August now. We are combining all of our different pruning techniques like this. In this cluster here, little tiny tomato, ain't going nowhere, gone. This little guy, gone. If you've been doing things right, you might run into a little bit of a problem this time of year. You might notice your tomatoes are getting too tall and they've outgrown your supports. Now that's where my conduit really shines. I can keep taking couplings. I can extend this as high as I need it to. There's also another option, kind of what you see here. Instead of tying this up, I'm kind of letting this hang down here. And what you can do is just take a string and maybe some tomato clips and just keep supporting it so it hangs here and it's within reach. Some people use a string and pulley system where you can kind of lower the top of the tomato down. Just for fun, I'm trying to see how tall I can grow these tomatoes. I got a ladder here if I need it to harvest and stake these guys up. Maybe you're trellising your tomatoes like I am here, where I let it flap over and I'm just tying it to this arch so it can fill in along here. Whatever you want to do at this point is up to you, but you do have a couple options because we are getting kind of late in the season now. And the tomatoes kind of know that because it's getting a little bit cooler at night. So the plants start freaking out. If you've been harvesting all the tomatoes off your plant, that plant sees that and it realizes, hey, I'm not going to have any seeds. The plant's sole purpose is to produce fruits to reproduce. So you will get this boom of late season growth. And at this point, if you want, you can choose to leave suckers. Here's an example here. When this plant reached about 6 feet tall, you can see the main stem here. And we have this big O sucker that comes out. Now, instead of chopping that sucker off, I just let it grow. And on this sucker, I've got tomatoes forming. And on the main leader, I have tomatoes forming. But leaving these suckers here is really more for convenience, so you can at least reach the top of your plant. It's really not going to affect production. You're going to get the same amount of tomatoes. The last thing we're going to talk about is topping off tomatoes. Now, you're going to get some point closer to the fall where the nights start getting a little bit cooler, and you're going to notice your tomato plants are slowing down, and you still have a lot of green fruits. Now, topping off is going to be a late season strategy. I'm already seeing people talking about it now, and it's just early August. You still have plenty of time. We're still going to get lots of hot days. But when you get closer to fall, you can help put an end to vegetative growth so the plants can focus on the fruits. So since it is early, I'm not actually going to cut this plant, but I'm going to show you what you could be doing here. You have all these nice green fruit clusters going up this plant. Closer to the top, they're a little bit smaller. If it was later in the season, getting cold, some of these smaller fruits aren't going to get ripe, so they're not helping out the plant. What you can do is cut this vine. Cut all that smaller stuff off. Stop the vegetative growth. With no top on this plant, no suckers in here, there's nowhere for this tomato to grow, and it will focus on putting energy into these last fruits, and hopefully, if you do it in time, these will grow a little bit and ripen. But if you've implemented all these pruning techniques I talked about, you've probably had a pretty successful season, and you might not be too worried about those last few tomatoes. All right, so this video is not as short as I hoped, but we did cover everything. Everything you need to know about pruning tomatoes. I really hope this video simplifies the pruning process of tomatoes because it's something everybody could do. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. Let's talk in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching.